Hello friends, welcome to today's discussion on MOA, that is Memorandum of Association. Yes, what is Memorandum of Association all about? First and foremost, let me put it very clearly that MOA is the most important document. It is the mother of all documents as far as the company is concerned. It sees or portrays what the company wants to do, what is its main business objectives, and who are the shareholders involved in such a company, where, in which state or where it is situated, and of course, definitely the liability part of the shareholders. These aspects are the primary aspects as far as any company is concerned. So let us see what is MOA all about. Important points regarding MOA. First one, MOA is a charter. By the way, please apologize me for the smaller font size, as I have to cover the entire aspect of MOA on one single board. I hope you understand the difficult situation that I am facing here. I could have split this into two videos, agreed, but the link would have missed out the elaborate discussions that I intend to explain to you would have missed out. Therefore, kindly accept my apologies here for writing it in a small font. I hope so you will understand the issue here. Let's come back. MOA is a charter of the company which defines its constitution and scope of the company's power. It is a charter document. Charter document means most important document of all documents as far as company is concerned. Yes, there is another set of document like articles of association. Yes, there could be board of directors, minutes, meetings, document. All those are subsidiary to MOA. MOA is the primary document. So it explains, or defines the constitution of the company as to what the company is all about, where it is going to head, what is the intention of the company, what are the various business objects of the company, and so on and so forth, and scope of the company's powers. So the powers given are assumed by the directors of the company from this primary document called MOA. Next, it is the very foundation on which the whole edifice of the company is built. Now, what is meant by edifice? Edifice means it's a complex system, and this complex system, whether the hierarchical structure is concerned, or for that matter, the branch-wise details of the company is concerned, or the retail outlets is concerned, or for that matter, the shareholding pattern is concerned. Most important of all, the shareholding pattern is concerned, the division of equity, the division of preference, and whether the company can borrow debts by way of debentures. All these things, the complex structure or the complex system of the company, which is nothing but the edifice of the company, is basically from the MOA. Therefore, we say MOA is the very foundation for this so-called complex structure of the company. Next, it contains the objects for which it was formed and the possible scope of operations beyond which its actions cannot go. So, as I have already told you, it is the very foundation document. It is the most important document. It contains the objects for which the company was incorporated and the possible scope of operations, what and all it can extend to. As of now, this is the objects of the business. It can also extend to such other scope of new operations possibly in the future. That details also can be mentioned. Well, I would like to mention this fact that in case the objects clause of the MOA does not have a scope of particular operation or one or more operations, and in case the company intends to pursue that operation, since it is not there in the MOA, then the company cannot take a stand to continue or start such operations. If and when it does, then the actions of which the company cannot do it. In simple words, what I would like to mention is whatever is the scope of operations mentioned in the MOA, only such scope of operations can be performed. So I hope I am very clear. Say if there is a particular scope of operation which is not mentioned in the MOA, company cannot do such an activity, company cannot take such an action or cannot perform such a transaction. Well, if it does so, then we have a point later, it will be called as ultra vires. I'll come to that point in some time. Next point, enables the shareholders or the creditors, those who deals with the company, to know about the powers and activities it can engage in. And coupled with it, it is a public document as per section 399. Therefore, the concept of doctrine of constructive notice applies here. I am doing a combination of fourth point and fifth point. What it says is the shareholders, the creditors, and those who deal those who deal with the company will know the powers and activities it can engage. How do they know? They will have to refer this MOA, which is a public document. Once it is a public document, anybody who intends to become a shareholder, anybody who intends to lend money to the company or sell goods to the company and reflect themselves as creditors of the company, or for that matter anybody who wants to enter into a contract with the company, are presumed to have the knowledge of the contents of MOA. That is precisely what we discussed in doctrine of constructive notice. So the outsiders, the so-called intended parties who want to enter into a contract, will know about the company's power and activities that it can engage in. Therefore, a doctrine of constructive notice applies here. The parties who are about to or supposed to enter into a contract is presumed to have knowledge about the powers and activities which the company can enter into or engage in. I hope your understanding about these points are clear. Continuing further, a company cannot depart from MOA, whatever be the necessity. If done, then it's an ultra vires transaction, which will be termed as a void transaction. That means a company, whenever it does a transaction, it should have its powers, or that particular transaction can be executed only if it has been mentioned in the MOA document. Whereas if the MOA is silent about it, or it does not have, or it is negatively framed in such a way that a company cannot do so and so activities, then in spite of that, if the company does such activities, then we call such transactions as ultra vires transactions, which is void. What is the important aspect to learn about it here? The company cannot sue on the other party, and the other party also cannot sue the company, because it is an ultra vires transaction. Sir, we understand that the company cannot sue the other party, being an ultra vires transaction. What makes you say that even the third person who wants to enter into a contract cannot sue the company for such an ultra vires transaction? Please recall my previous point about doctrine of constructive notice, MOA being a public document, doctrine of constructive notice being applicable. It is presumed that you know the fact that company cannot enter into such a transaction which is ultra vires, and in spite of that, if you have entered into such a transaction, then of course you will not get the right to sue the company. That is the meaning of ultra vires transactions. Let's continue and see further what it is. There are certain procedural formalities and model forms to be used. Let us see what it is. As per section 4 of the Companies Act, MOA should be in such forms. Table A for companies limited by shares. That means the MOA should be in such forms as prescribed under the respective tables given under section 4 of the Companies Act. So table A is for companies limited by shares. Table B is for companies limited by guarantee but not having share capital. Please observe this. Table B is for companies limited by guarantee and not having share capital. Please recall what we have discussed in the different types of share capital, limited shares, limited by guarantee, and so on and so forth. So table C for companies limited by guarantee but having share capital. So the difference between table B and table C is basically table B talks about a form which is used as used by the companies which are limited by guarantee but not having share capital, whereas in the case of table C, it is companies that the form table C provides is used by the company for limited by companies limited by guarantee and having share capital. That's a small subtle difference that you have to observe here. Remember, wrong usage of forms can also be a bigger issue as far as compliance is concerned. Continuing further, table D is for unlimited company and table E is for unlimited company having share capital. So it goes without saying that table D is for unlimited company not having share capital, and table E is for unlimited company having share capital. So again, recall the points which we have discussed in different types of share capital, that is limited by shares, liability limited by shares, liability limited by guarantee, and unlimited liability cases. Unlimited liability having share capital also is one of the cases. So these are the respective forms that you have to use as far as MOA is concerned, governed under Section 4 of Companies Act. Please note that MOA and AOA must be as close as possible to such model forms depending upon the circumstances. In AOA session also I have explained that it should be as close as possible. If you want to add certain points, definitely yes, you can add certain points, but it should not go against the intention of the Companies Act. That is what we have discussed earlier also. The same thing continues to hold here. That is, MOA and AOA should be as close to as these forms are possible. In case you need to add some points, definitely you are permitted to add some points, but such points should not be against the provisions of Companies Act. So these were the basic points as far as MOA is concerned. Let us see the contents of MOA. Most important of all is contents of MOA and a target exam question in my opinion. Quickly we shall discuss about the contents. First one, name clause. Basically you have categorized into 6 items, that is name clause, registered office clause, objects clause, liability clause, capital clause, and association clause. All these 6 clauses are absolutely important and relevant for every company. Therefore, it is pertinent to note the fact that in case you want to practice in future, these are the basics that you have to start off with as far as understanding registration of a company is concerned and dealing with the company is concerned about the concept of MOA. Let's see what is there in the contents. First one, name clause. Straightforward. A public limited company, the name should end by the word limited. Then private limited company, then you should use the word private limited. Then if it is a government company, then you should use the word limited as last words of the company. So in case of any public limited company where the shareholders are more than 7, minimum 7 shareholders for public limited company, and private limited company, at least 2 shareholders should be there, then the usage of the words limited, private limited respectively should happen as the last words of such company. Whereas if it is a government company, then it is straight, you have to use the word limited as the last words. Please recall some of the cases that you have, some of the companies that you have seen, the last word LTD, limited, is definitely used. I hope you are recalling and enjoying this fact that whatever you have seen is apparently here in the compliance section of MOA. Continuing further, now this words called limited or for private limited, in case of private limited company, is not applicable to Section 8 companies. Now what is a Section 8 company? Section 8 company is a company which is formed for not-for-profit purposes. That means it has charitable intentions. It does not intend to have or it does not have a profit motive behind its transactions. Therefore, you can register a company as a Section 8 company as well, like we do trusts and charitable trusts and schools and colleges under the Trust Act. Similarly, you can have a not-for-profit motive entity, which is called Section 8 companies. Now, can I use the word limited or private limited for Section 8 companies? No, you cannot use. Then what else can I use is, let's see the point number B here. Electoral trust, as per Electoral Trust Scheme 2013, notified by CBDT, Central Board of Direct Taxes, and the words foundation, forum, association, federation, chambers, confederation, council, and like words or similar words can be included in the name of Section 8 companies. So you are not supposed to use the word limited or private limited for the Section 8 companies, whereas you can use electoral trust as one of the word. Then you can use foundation, forum, association, federation, chambers, confederation, council, and similar words as far as Section 8 companies is concerned. I hope that was a straight point to you. Now, this is again as per the legal rules. The rules are covered by the Companies Incorporation Rules 2014. So, where do you get the power to use such words? If you are using electoral trust as the word for a Section 8 company, you get that through Electoral Trust Scheme notified by the CBDT. So, Electoral Trust Scheme 2013, along with that, a notification issued by the CBDT. Based on that, you can use Electoral Trust as the name of Section 8 company. Whereas, if you are using foundation, forum, association, etc., then such words are as per the Companies Incorporation Rules 2014. Are we clear on this? So limited, private limited cannot be used by Section 8 companies. The suggested words called electoral trust, foundation, etc., can be used because there is a respective rule involved or there is a notification involved over there. Continuing further, in case if it is a one-person company, then the words OPC should be below the name. Whereas what we have understood till now is private limited company, limited word, private limited word should be the last words. Whereas in the case of a one-person company, the company's name would be there. Below the name, OPC should be mentioned. That is, one-person company should be mentioned. It is not the last words. It is below the name of the company. Are we clear on these points, my dear friends? Next point, registered office clause. The state in which the registered office of the company is situated has to be mentioned. For example, if a company is registered in the state of Karnataka, if it is registered in the state in Bangalore, then we say the registered office is Karnataka State ROC. It could be Bangalore, it could be Hubli, it could be Belgaum, it could be any part of Karnataka. Then we can call it as a registered office situated in the state of Karnataka, ROC state being Karnataka state. Now, in comparison with that, if you take for example Tamil Nadu, then you have two registered offices. One is in Chennai, one is in Coimbatore. So wherever you registered, you have the option of registering the company either in Chennai ROC or Coimbatore ROC, depending upon the convenience of the companies where it wants to register. Yes, objects clause, very important point of all. Objects, that is nature and the business related things. What and all are the businesses that the company intends to carry in future? The primary businesses, secondary businesses, tertiary businesses, all sort of businesses, whatever the intention of the company, the foresightedness of the company is, they can bring it into the objects clause. That is, objects, nature of business and related things for which the company is proposed to be incorporated, and any other matters considered necessary to achieve such objects. That is why I said, if you want to do a type of business, you should also have its subsidiary or allied businesses and its tertiary connected businesses involved. Otherwise, you may end up in a problem with MOA not having the powers to enter into such businesses. So a detailed drafting becomes a professional skill here when you are incorporating a company. So always you suggest a particular client of yours who wants to take or who wants to register a private limited company to go for an expert professional advice when it comes to registration of a company as far as a drafting of MOA is concerned. Yes, we do get Google draftings. Yes, we do have precise tables in which we can use the ideal forms, but it could be possible that certain companies have unique features, uniqueness involved in setting up or intending to do some business which is totally new to the present world. Therefore, it is a skill getting involved here, professional expert skill getting involved here. So be careful while drafting the objects clause. Whatever the intention of business of the company is today, you can't stop it there. You should have the foresightedness to think that this business could have a link with another business. It could lead to another type of a transaction. Eventually, if and when you enter into such transaction, you should not find your place you should not feel that, or rather, you should not be locked in a legal tangle that you do not have the power, that is, a company do not have the power to enter into such transaction, because such transactions were not finding its place in the objects clause. That was the important part of it. Let us see further. If the company has changed the line of activities, the name also should be changed in line with the business within 6 months from the change, after complying with the provisions of Companies Act of the name change. Means, let's say Infosys Technologies, which is primarily into software business, and suddenly Infosys Technologies wants to enter into real estate business. Now, assuming these are all assumptions, I'm giving it as an example. If that has happened, within 6 months from the change, the word Infosys Technologies should be converted into Infosys Properties probably, or Infosys Real Estate, or any of the words associated with real estate. So if such change has taken place within 6 months, you are supposed to change the name of the company, which is in line of the business activities of the company. It should not mislead the third person who is entering into a transaction with the company. Of course, yes, the third person should be referring a MOA as being a public document and then enter it into, but as a matter of good corporate governance, it is good that you comply with these points and safeguard the interest of the company. Continuing further, liability clause, this is pretty straightforward. Company limited by shares, that means liability of the members is limited to the amount unpaid on the shares. In accountancy chapter, you would have seen application money, allotment money, first call money, second call money, final call money. So all these call monies basically is when the company wants the funds for the purpose of expansion or otherwise, it asks for call money to the extent of money not yet called. That is the liability which the shareholders will bear on their head. What if all the shares have been paid up fully, then the liability of the shareholder is basically zero. In case the company goes for a toss, the maximum that the shareholder will lose is to the extent what is paid already as share capital. So company means liability is limited as far as company limited by shares is concerned. Further, in case if the company is company limited by guarantee, observe this, amount to which each member undertakes to contribute in the event of winding up to pay towards the debts or liabilities. Here I have some important points to share. What is that? If a company is limited by guarantee, then each and every member should be undertaking how much he will contribute in case the company goes for winding up. Why should they contribute? If the company goes for winding up, obviously the liabilities have to be paid, the debts have to be repaid back. Then if there is a shortfall of assets to clear such liabilities, each and every shareholder member have to mention that they are undertaking to the extent of X amount of rupees or Y amount of rupees as far as settling the dues in the form of debts and liabilities is concerned. Important point to be noted here is 1 year before the date of ceasing to be a member is also included to pay here. In sense, whenever a company goes for liquidation, there are two set of members. One is called A-list contributories and two is called B-list contributories. A-list contributories are those members who are present at the time of winding up. B-list contributories are those people who have ceased to be a member. That means who sold their share or who left the company as far as member is concerned 1 year before the date of winding up. Within 1 year, if they have ceased to be a member, then such members also are to be treated as persons available to receive the contributions as far as settling the debts and liabilities of the company is concerned. Keep it simple. A-list contributories are those with present members. B-list contributories are those who were members 1 year before the liquidation, or rather 1 year before the winding up date. These two are members from whom the company can receive the money for settlement of debt and liabilities in the case of liquidation. Sir, when would B-list contributories come into picture? It's like this. First step, sell all the assets, try to repay the liabilities. In case there is a shortfall, ask A-list contributories to, that is the present members, to provide for the repayment of the debt and repayment of liabilities. In case there is a shortfall there also, then you can approach the B-list contributories. So basically, selling the assets is the first criteria, then A-list contributories, then B-list contributories. That B-list contributories are those people who are 1 year before the date of ceasing to be a member, can also be included in for the purpose of payment of debt or liability of the company in the event of liquidation. I hope you got the point. Next, capital clause. It should be authorized share capital, which we know. Authorized, subscribed, authorized, issued, subscribed, called up, paid up, calls in arrears, calls in advance. I am sure that you know all these facts, which is already elaborately covered in accountancy session. So, authorized share capital, the share of fixed amount, that is whether the face value of the share is 10 rupees per share, 100 rupees per share, 1000 rupees per share, what not. Then the number of shares and the subscribers with their names and the number of shares such a subscriber has purchased. So basically the authorized share capital, then the face value of the share, whether it is 10 rupees or 100 rupees or 1000 rupees, etc. Then the total number of shares that the company intends to issue, then the subscribers who have purchased such shares and names of such subscribers along with how many shares they have subscribed. This leads to the accountancy session which we have discussed called par subscription, over subscription, under subscription. Keep that in mind. I'm sure you'll be able to handle this. Remember, the condition is whenever you are purchasing a share, it should be at least one share. This clause is not applicable if the company is not having share capital, which is fair enough. So if you are to become a subscriber to the MOA, then you should at least purchase one share, which is fairly logical. You can't have split shares, that is, you can't buy 0.5 shares or you can't buy 0.8 shares. It should be one share at least, or in multiples thereof. Are we clear on this point, my dear friends? Fantastic. Then last clause, association clause, is it is nothing but a document which states a desire of the subscribers to be formed into a company by taking at least one share in their name. So there are a set of members in the public or set of people who are desiring to form themselves into a company by subscribing at least one share in the company. Therefore, henceforth, the so and so persons who had the desire will be under the association clause be termed as members of the company as the company gets incorporated with these particular members and their respective shares that they have purchased. So these were the important points as far as MOA is concerned, my dear friends. Remember, 6 clauses, very important: name clause, registered office clause, objects clause, liability clause, capital clause, and lastly, association clause. So that was the contents of MOA, and in the last bit, we shall see certain general notes as far as MOA is concerned. Check this out. MOA should be printed, divided into paragraphs, consecutively numbered, signed by at least 7 or 2 for public and private limited company respectively, which we have known. These are procedural issues that we have to cover, hence let's complete that as well. So basically, MOA should be printed, divided into paragraphs, consecutively numbered like page numbers, signed by at least 7 members in the case of public limited company and at least 2 members in the case of private limited company. Next, in the case of OPC, it should be signed by at least one person with a presence of one witness who attests the signature and gives details of all. That is, if you are a subscriber to the MOA of a public limited company, 7 members with one witness who is attesting his signature stating that the facts mentioned above are true and correct to the best of his knowledge and belief. If it is private limited company, then 2 subscribers to the memorandum and 1 witness. If it is a OPC, then 1 subscriber to the company and 1 witness who is attesting the facts mentioned in the MOA. Precisely, most of it in my professional field, I have seen either a chartered accountant attesting it or a company secretary attesting it. So that was the first point, a general note. Next point, in the case of a company, its agent can subscribe. That is, if a company is becoming a shareholder of another company, the company can authorize its agent, let's say a director of the company, who is authorized to become a member of the company. He will be representing the purchasing company. That is, let's say A Limited wants to purchase shares in B Limited. A Limited can authorize Mr. X, who is the agent of A Limited, to purchase the shares. The fact that X has purchased the shares means A Limited has purchased the shares in B Limited. Now, a minor cannot subscribe, but if the guardian subscribes on behalf of the minor, the guardian does it on his personal capacity. That means we all know under Contract Act 1872, a minor is not capable to enter into a contract. Therefore, a minor cannot purchase shares as it puts liability on his head. In case such a transaction is there, we all know that it is null and void ab initio. However, as an extension, if a guardian of the minor purchases shares on behalf of the minor, then guardian is doing it in his personal capacity. Liability cannot come on the head of the minor. I hope it was simple and straightforward. Next, last but not the least, for an OPC, guardian does it in his personal capacity, and for OPC, the name of the person in the event of the death of the subscriber to the OPC should be mentioned. Such person shall become the member of the OPC. So when a OPC is getting registered, the one person company, that one person should be the member of the company. Only one person is the member of the company. Having said that, the details of another person should be also mentioned. In case of a death of this former person, the other person who is being mentioned is as a next person to the subscriber to the MOA will become automatically a member in the event of death of the first mentioned member. Example, A, OPC, Mr. A is the member. He should mention after his death who can become the member. Let's say he can mention his wife's name or his son's or daughter's name or his mother's name or whatever names that he wants to mention. Only one name that can be mentioned because it is a one-person company. Such a person will become the member of the OPC in the event of death of the former member of the OPC. Are we clear on these points, my dear friends? Fantastic. Last points. Above clause of MOA are compulsory. In addition to it, MOA may contain other provisions, but the whole or any part of MOA cannot be contrary to Companies Act. If it is, then it is void. I have already discussed this point, that these are the points which is compulsory to be there in MOA. Whatever we have read till now, MOA points, whichever is mentioned here, are compulsory, mandatory. In case you choose to put additional points, you are permitted to put that additional points. However, such additional points or the whole of the MOA or any part of the MOA cannot be against the provisions of Companies Act. If it is against the provisions of Companies Act, then to that extent it shall be treated as void. As simple as that. What I mean to say is you cannot have a MOA which is against the provisions of Companies Act. If it is, then it is to that extent void. Are we clear on this? Yes. all other documents of the company must comply with the provisions of MOA. That means once the MOA is segregated and clearly established, it is in line with the provisions of Companies Act, all the respective tables are adhered to, all the clauses and contents mentioned in the MOA is taken care of. Once MOA is perfect, then any other document thereafter, like articles of association or bylaws of the company, or for that matter any other document which is subsidiary document to the MOA, such subsidiary documents should be in line with MOA. Are we clear on this, my dear friends? So this was the clearly explained details of MOA. Target question in my opinion for the exam. Please do not forget it. Having said that, a tip is understand MOA fully, understand AOA fully, prepare yourself by virtue of understanding the difference between MOA and AOA. So we come to an end of this session. In the next session, I will be discussing about ultra vires transaction, which is a small session. I would have probably covered it here itself, but it would be too much of reducing the font size. Therefore, let me take that in the next session. Thank you very much. If you have any doubts, please do mail your doubts to lohitsacademy@gmail.com. I will revert back to you. Thank you.